Your son's academic performance isn't the issue here, Mrs. Thompson. The words sliced through the pristine air of Sterling Academy's parent assembly hall. Sarah Thompson's hands trembled as she clutched her son's report card, straight A's across every subject. Around her, designer suits and pearls rustled with quiet satisfaction, the elite parents of Sterling savoring her humiliation. The director's next words would haunt the room. It's simply a matter of maintaining certain standards. Our community has expectations. The assembly hall gleamed with old money, mahogany panels and brass fixtures that had witnessed generations of privilege. Sarah stood alone at the podium, her target blazer a stark contrast to the sea of Chanel and Brooks Brothers surrounding her. In the back row, a figure in a worn leather jacket shifted slightly, ocean blue eyes taking in the scene with growing intensity. Matthew McConaughey hadn't planned on speaking at his nephew's school assembly, but something about this moment felt eerily familiar. Whispers rippled through the crowd as Sarah's voice cracked, describing her son's dreams of becoming a neurosurgeon. The director's practiced smile never wavered as he explained how unfortunate timing and missed payments had consequences. In the growing tension, McConaughey's chair scraped back slightly. He'd fought his way up from nothing once, and the look in Sarah's eyes, that mix of desperation and fierce pride, was about to change everyone's evening plans. Sarah Thompson's fingers traced the crease in her son Michael's acceptance letter, worn soft from countless readings. For 2 years, she'd worked 3 jobs to keep him at Sterling Academy. Night shifts at the hospital, weekend bookkeeping, online tutoring between precious hours of sleep. Michael's perfect grades and his teacher's glowing praise had made every exhausted moment worth it. Until now. The assembly hall's tension thickened as Mrs. Rothschild, head of the Parents Association, cleared her throat delicately. While we sympathize with your situation, she adjusted her Cartier glasses, Sterling's reputation rests on a certain caliber of family, those who understand our traditions, our values. Her carefully manicured hand gestured vaguely at Sarah's worn blazer. Perhaps a public school would be more appropriate for your circumstances. Several parents nodded in practiced unison. In the back row, McConaughey's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He recognized the familiar dance of old money, the gentle, poisoned words that kept outsiders in their place. His own mother's voice echoed in his memory. They can take away your chances, but never your dignity. Director Henderson stood, his tailored suit a perfect match for Sterling's mahogany podium. Mrs. Thompson, your son's scholarship was contingent on timely payment of remaining fees. We've been quite patient with your payment arrangements. He paused, allowing his words to settle like dust on fine china. But Sterling Academy isn't a charity. The word charity rippled through the assembly hall, drawing winces of practiced sympathy from Gucci handbags and Rolex watches. Sarah felt her son's future crumbling with each murmured agreement. Michael, who spent lunch hours tutoring struggling classmates. Michael, who'd won the state science fair with his neuroplasticity research. Michael, who dreamed of curing Alzheimer's after watching it claim his grandmother. 3 weeks, Sarah's voice trembled but held. I just need 3 more weeks until my extra shifts clear. Her words hung in the air, met with the soft, devastating sounds of upper-class dismissal. The gentle clearing of throats, the quiet shuffling of expensive shoes, the soft clicks of designer pearls against silk blouses. Mrs. Rothschild's voice cut through the silence like expensive scissors through silk. Perhaps we should discuss what's really at stake here. She rose, pearls gleaming under crystal chandeliers. Our children compete for the same college spots, the same opportunities. Every scholarship given to an outsider's child means one less spot for those who've been part of Sterling's legacy for generations. The truth of Sterling Academy emerged naked and ugly under the refined lighting. This wasn't about missed payments or maintaining standards. This was about keeping the gates closed, the bloodlines pure, the power concentrated. In the back row, McConaughey's fingers drummed a quiet rhythm on his armrest. He'd seen this story before, in Hollywood, in Texas oil fields, in every place where money tried to trump merit. His nephew had mentioned Michael Thompson once, the brilliant kid who'd helped him understand calculus when no one else could. Now, watching Sarah Thompson stand alone against generations of privilege, he felt the weight of his own journey from trailer park to Oscar stage. Director Henderson's voice hardened with practiced authority. "The board's decision is final, Mrs. Thompson. While Michael's academic performance has been admirable, Sterling Academy must consider its entire community. We'll need him to complete his transfer paperwork by Friday." Sarah's hands gripped the podium, knuckles white against dark wood. "My son tutors half of his class. He started a science club. Her voice caught as Mrs. Rothschild's perfectly timed sigh cut through the air. "And we're very grateful for Michael's contributions," Mrs. Rothschild smiled with diplomatic venom. "But surely you understand. Sterling families invest more than just money in this institution. We build legacies here. Our children's children will walk these halls. It's about belonging to a certain circle." The assembly hall hummed with murmurs of agreement. Parents nodded, secure in their positions, their designer labels, their generations of carefully curated privilege. A father in a $1,000 suit checked his Patek Philippe watch, already bored with the proceedings. In the back row, McConaughey leaned forward slightly. He'd heard words like these before, in studio offices and country clubs. Not our kind, different circles, wrong background, the same polite poison that had nearly kept him from his first big role, wrapped in different packaging, but just as toxic. Sarah's voice shook but didn't break. "My son earned his place here, his grades, his work, his character." "Character," Mrs. Rothschild interrupted smoothly, "isn't everything, dear." The assembly hall's atmosphere shifted as another parent stood, Mr. Carson, investment banker, Sterling board member, father of Michael's closest friend. "Let's be practical about this," he said, adjusting his tie with manicured fingers. "How can we expect our children to network properly when their classmates come from, well," he gestured vaguely at Sarah's worn blazer, "different socioeconomic backgrounds?" Sarah's son's best friend, James Carson, slumped lower in his seat, his face burning red. Just last week, he and Michael had been celebrating their joint science fair victory, their complementary research on neural networks promising enough to attract university attention. "Perhaps," Mrs. Rothschild added, her voice dripping with false concern, "this is actually better for Michael. Public school would be less pressured, more with his own kind." She smiled, the kind of smile that could cut glass. "We wouldn't want him feeling out of place." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. 2 years of triple shifts, of helping Michael maintain perfect grades while working herself to exhaustion, of watching him flourish among these children who saw nothing wrong with casual cruelty, dissolved into bitter reality. McConaughey's chair creaked as he shifted forward. He recognized the moment when polite facades crumbled, when the mask of civility fell away to reveal raw prejudice. His own mother's voice echoed in his memory. "They'll try to make you feel small. That's when you stand tallest." Director Henderson cleared his throat. "If there are no other matters to discuss—" Sarah's voice cracked, but her spine remained steel straight. "My son spends his lunch hours tutoring your children. He helped your daughter understand calculus, Mr. Carson. He stayed late every day for 2 weeks to help your son with chemistry, Mrs. Rothschild." The uncomfortable truth rippled through the assembly. Several students shifted in their seats, remembering moments when Michael Thompson's patient explanations had transformed confusion into clarity. That's exactly the problem, Mrs. Rothschild snapped, her polished veneer finally cracking. Our children shouldn't need help from... She caught herself, but the unspoken words hung in the air like poison. Director Henderson stepped forward quickly. I think we've heard enough. Mrs. Thompson, the decision stands. Security will escort you out if necessary. The mention of security sparked murmurs of approval from the wealthy parents. This was familiar territory. The disposal of inconvenient elements, handled discreetly, maintaining their carefully curated world. 2 security guards appeared at the hall's entrance. Sarah clutched Michael's acceptance letter tighter, her last anchor to her son's dreams crumpling in her fingers. A chair scraped against hardwood in the back row. The sound shouldn't have carried over the murmurs and whispers, but somehow it cut through everything like a knife through silk. Footsteps followed, unhurried but deliberate, boots against polished floor. The assembly's atmosphere shifted as Matthew McConaughey stood. Not the Hollywood smile or the charming drawl they'd expected, but something older, harder. The look of a man who remembered what it meant to be judged by your zip code instead of your worth. McConaughey's boots echoed through the suddenly silent hall. The security guards hesitated, caught between their orders and the unexpected presence of an Oscar winner. The actor's usual easy smile was nowhere to be seen, replaced by something that reminded the assembly of his harder roles, the steel beneath the charm. You know, his voice carried that familiar Texas drawl, but stripped of its Hollywood warmth. I've been sitting back there thinking about circles. Mrs. Rothschild here seems mighty concerned about them. He moved deliberately toward the podium, each step measured. About who belongs in which one. The assembled parents shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't in their script. Celebrities were supposed to be allies in their world of privilege, not opponents. It's interesting, McConaughey continued, now standing beside Sarah, how folks love to draw circles, small ones, exclusive ones, the kind that keep people out. His ocean blue eyes swept the room, pinning each wealthy parent in place. My mama taught first grade in Texas, public school, had a student once, brilliant kid, lot like Michael here. Teachers said he didn't belong in advanced classes. Wrong background, they said. Wrong circle. He paused, letting the weight of memory settle. That kid was me, standing right where Michael is now, watching people with power try to define his worth by his mama's bank account. Mrs. Rothschild's perfectly manicured fingers fidgeted with her pearls. Director Henderson cleared his throat, but McConaughey wasn't finished. See, here's the thing about circles. McConaughey's voice hardened, carrying the weight of personal experience. They're perfect shapes, no beginning, no end. But some folks, his eyes locked with Mrs. Rothschild's, they like to think they can own them, control who gets in, who stays out. He pulled out a folded paper from his jacket, a newspaper clipping about Sterling Academy's science fair. Michael Thompson and James Carson's revolutionary approach to neural network design suggests potential breakthroughs in early Alzheimer's detection. He let the words hang in the air. Funny thing about science, it doesn't care about your zip code or your daddy's trust fund. Mr. Carson shifted uncomfortably, remembering how his son James had excitedly explained their project over dinner, Michael's name peppered throughout the conversation with admiration. You want to talk about Sterling's legacy? McConaughey's voice filled the hall. Let's talk about what legacy really means. Is it about maintaining those small, tight circles you're so proud of? Or is it about nurturing brilliant minds that might just change the world? Director Henderson stepped forward, attempting to regain control. Mr. McConaughey, while we appreciate your perspective, Sterling Academy's policies... Policies? McConaughey cut him off, the word sharp as a blade. I remember policies. They're what kept my mama working 3 jobs just like Sarah here. They're what almost kept me out of my first big role. Always the same story. Not our kind, different circles, maintaining standards. McConaughey reached into his jacket again, pulling out a checkbook. The movement silenced the hall. This was something they understood, the language of money. But he didn't open it. Instead, he placed it on the podium and stepped back. "I could write a check right now, cover Michael's tuition through graduation. That's what you want, right? Money to make this problem go away?" His voice carried a dangerous edge. "But that's not the real problem here, is it?" James Carson suddenly stood up, his voice shaking, but clear. "Michael helped me understand the neural network concepts. Our project wouldn't have won without him. He's the smartest person in our class." Mrs. Rothschild's face tightened. "James, sit down." "No." McConaughey's voice cut through the tension. "Let him speak, because that's what this is really about, isn't it? Not money, not standards. It's about fear. Fear that this kid from the wrong side of the tracks might just prove that your circles, your barriers, your whole system of keeping people out, it's all smoke and mirrors." He turned to Sarah, whose tears now fell freely, but whose spine remained straight as steel. "Your son doesn't need my check, Mrs. Thompson. And this school?" He turned back to the assembly, his eyes hard as Texas flint. "This school needs Michael, a whole lot more than he needs it." The silence that followed was deafening. In that moment, every parent in the room felt the ground shift beneath their designer shoes, their carefully constructed world cracking at its foundations. Director Henderson's carefully constructed world of policy and privilege began to crumble as more students stood up. The captain of the debate team, a girl in a perfectly pressed uniform, spoke next. "Michael helped our team win states. He researched every topic, stayed late every practice. We need him." More voices joined in. The chemistry club president, the math team captain, even Mrs. Rothschild's daughter, her Tiffany bracelet jingling as she raised her hand. "He explained derivatives better than our tutor, the one we pay $200 an hour for." The assembly hall hummed with a new energy as the truth emerged, not in whispers of exclusion, but in clear voices of support. Parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats as their own children testified to Michael Thompson's impact on their education. McConaughey watched silently, his earlier intensity softening into something like satisfaction. He'd seen this before, the moment when artificial barriers started to crack, when truth spoke louder than tradition. Mr. Carson stood slowly, straightening his Hermes tie. "As a board member," he began, his voice carrying the weight of authority, "I move to review our scholarship policies, all of them." He glanced at his son James, who beamed with pride. "Merit should mean more than money. That's the legacy Sterling should be building." The whispers that followed were different now. Not the hiss of exclusion, but the murmur of change. Other board members nodded, their expressions shifting from discomfort to determination. Even Mrs. Rothschild's perfectly maintained facade showed cracks of uncertainty. Sarah Thompson stood straighter, her tears drying as she watched the transformation unfold. Her son's future, which had seemed so precarious moments ago, was solidifying before her eyes. McConaughey's presence beside her felt like a bridge between worlds, the self-made success standing with the struggling mother, both proving that circles could be broken and redrawn. Director Henderson cleared his throat, reading the room with the skill of a career administrator. "Perhaps," he offered carefully, "we should establish a committee to review our admissions criteria immediately." McConaughey's final words to the assembly carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "You know what makes a circle powerful?" He gestured to the students still standing, to Sarah, to the changing faces of the board members. "Not what it keeps out, what it brings in. Every mind you exclude is a future you'll never see." The next day, Sterling Academy's board announced a comprehensive review of its scholarship program. Michael Thompson's position was secured, with a full review of financial aid policies to follow. But the real change was visible in the hallways, in the proud set of Sarah's shoulders as she walked through the front doors, in the way other parents began to look at merit before money. James and Michael's neural network project went on to win nationals. Mrs. Rothschild was seen congratulating Sarah at the ceremony, her words no longer carrying their sharp edges. And if anyone noticed Matthew McConaughey quietly funding a new merit-based scholarship program at Sterling, well, that was just another circle being drawn, bigger, brighter, and open to all who earned their place within it.